You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk. And we've decided to go south in the biohealth capital region today and talk to one of the leaders down there who's helping create that vibrant biohealth ecosystem that is really growing in Virginia these days. And our guest is Dr. Joy Polefrone, Executive Director for the Alliance for Building Better Medicine, which is relatively new in this region that a lot of us probably haven't heard about. And we're going to learn all about building better medicines from Joy today. So Joy, welcome to BioTalk.
Thank you so much, Rich. It's wonderful to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and you're going to get to educate everybody about the ABBM. Is that what you use as an acronym for it?
Some do. I tend to refer to it as the Alliance, but that can sort of sound like a superhero group versus an organization of different entities trying to solve problems in healthcare. But yeah, ABBM is just fine.
Well, no, we'll go with the Alliance, but there's so many alliances and yours is unique, and we'll make sure that we give it its proper due. So, and before we talk about the Alliance, we want to learn about Joy. So how about giving a little background on how you evolved to where you are today?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to. I grew up in Virginia and went to Virginia schools for undergrad and graduate school. My undergrad was in chemistry. My graduate degree was in chemistry. Undergrad from James Madison University and graduate degree from the University of Virginia. And when I was finishing up graduate school, I realized that I wasn't a scientist who was going to be in a lab for the rest of my life. I really enjoyed my graduate work, but I knew that where I resonated was more in the building of teams and organizations. So I ended up working for a nonprofit startup in Charlottesville, Virginia called the Focused Ultrasound Foundation that's doing phenomenal work in moving forward an industry that is reshaping the way that certain types of cancer are treated. And then working for Philips Healthcare for the better part of a decade in Helsinki and Boston and Seattle. And then about 4 years ago, I moved back to Virginia, to Richmond for the first time, and really sort of pressed the reset button, wanted to work more locally and maybe a little less globally. And over time, came to get to know the ecosystem that is here in Richmond, Virginia, and the surrounding areas, and came to learn a little bit about the work that's happening in the pharmaceutical manufacturing space while I was doing work at VCU and VCU Health in innovation and entrepreneurship. And so when the Alliance for Building Better Medicine was hiring its first executive director, I was really excited to apply for that role because it felt like a wonderful combination of the capabilities that I had built over the years of working in startups and nonprofits and startups and for-profits and cross-functional multidisciplinary teaming and coalition building through business units or other companies and academic and industry partnerships. Sort of all coalescing into this one opportunity was well-timed in this region to build something new here.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a very unique background that's well suited for what you're doing today because you have all of the elements of the three-legged stool in private-public partnerships between academia, industry, and nonprofits or NGOs. So I think they selected well in you becoming the first executive director. And the other thing, you mentioned that you're a Virginian, and I don't tell many people this. I forget to, but I was born in Arlington, Virginia. And my dad was at Fort Belvoir after the Second World War. I guess that sort of dates me too. But at the end of the day, I lived in Virginia my first 6 months of my life. So I'm technically a Virginian just like you are, except you've spent a lot more time there than I have, Joy.
I have. And what I'll say about that too is that having left Virginia and worked and lived in different environments that are global, that have different cultural elements. I mean, living in Helsinki and working in that country while also doing a tremendous amount of work in India gave me a perspective about collaboration and working across different cultures that I don't think I could have ever gotten had I not, sort of left Virginia for the better part of 15 years and then come back.
Yeah, and the funny thing is when you talk about culture, sometimes you don't even have to leave America and you can have so many different cultures in your own backyard. But with what you did internationally, it prepared you better with what you were trying to do and building your coalitions and your consortium of partners down in Virginia. So, and while we're talking about that, what is the Alliance for Building Better Medicine?
Yeah. So the Alliance is a coalition of 15 partners now that have come together to build a regional biopharmaceutical ecosystem to create a resilient drug supply. And that group of individuals came together before Build Back Better Regional Challenge, but I think that's sort of the initiative that gelled these coalition members together. And a subset of that group came together following a planning grant that was funded through the state of Virginia. And that planning grant really allowed the vision casting to be put into operational planning. And then the state of Virginia funded implementation dollars for the work that the coalition was doing and really the formation of the coalition. And that happened in 2022. And so, or 2020 rather. And so the work of this group started before the pandemic and started before Build Back Better was announced. And the work that they had done was so much in collaboration, looking at how might we solve the problem of building a resilient drug supply in the United States. And then when the pandemic happened, it certainly positioned the groups very, very well to understand how might we solve that problem more robustly, and then apply for the Build Back Better Regional Challenge Phase 1 and Phase 2 grants. And so when I look across the coalition, it's a unique combination of organizations that you might not ever see working together otherwise. So we've got economic development organizations that are both regional and statewide. We have two cities that typically compete with one another, Petersburg and Richmond, same with the economic development organizations, who are very much partnered together in figuring out how do we create an ecosystem that can change the landscape of opportunity for their regions and for their cities. And then, of course, we have industry partners, and we also have individuals who are in nonprofit areas themselves. So US Pharmacopoeia, which is based in the DC area in Rockville, Maryland, actually, and has really looked at this opportunity and said, we see continuous manufacturing of pharmaceuticals as being a game changer for how we develop pharmaceutical manufacturing in the future. And so we're going to invest in partnering and determining how we build the standard set that supports that. And there's quite a few others that I won't go into every single one of them in detail, but you have 15 different entities that are now working locked arms in determining how do we build the strategy to reshape opportunity for a region, but also with a very strong focus on building a resilient drug supply system.
So, there's a lot of background that you just went through there, but somebody originally had an idea that there was a need and an opportunity for something like this. So even though you have 15 partners now, it originated somewhere. How did it originate, and who was the driver behind the Alliance for Building Better Medicine?
Yeah, that's a great question and a really fantastic story. So Frank Upton is a professor at VCU, has a background in the pharmaceuticals and other spaces in chemistry where he has learned over his career in the industry space what are some new and innovative ways to manufacture small molecules. And most recently, before joining VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, he played a role in looking at the formulation using different types of chemistry for HIV drugs. Nevirapine is the one that he looked at. And so Frank had seen what chemistry, let's say retrosynthetic analysis and reformulation of molecules and synthetic molecules development, what that could do for cost and ecological footprint and the ability to manufacture those molecules in different environments. And so when he took the position at VCU and stood up the Medicines for All Institute, which is funded by the Gates Foundation, he started doing work in different areas where he was using continuous flow manufacturing and hybrid manufacturing to create new synthetic pathways for old molecules, so generic medicines. And in doing so, he realized that this actually could have a tremendous impact on the generic medicine supply that we have in the United States that is currently manufactured using batch manufacturing almost exclusively outside the United States. About 80% of small molecules that we receive as APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients today, come from outside the United States. And what Frank realized is that we had assets in this region, and those assets in this region could get organized together in order to be able to build something here that hasn't really existed in the United States. And he partnered after the first grant, the planning grant happened, he partnered with Activation Capital, which is a tremendous convening organization and ecosystem development here in Richmond, to really build a coalition of partners to do this work together. But really, if we look at the vision for the work of where this all started, it is an individual who has had the ability to look across all of the different experiences that he's had over the years and say, what have I learned from each of these experiences working in the petrochemical industry to working in small molecule medicines that would allow me to look at this problem of manufacturing medicines in the United States and do it differently so that it could actually be possible, that it could be not just economically viable, but ecologically viable to happen here in the United States. And so he's really the visionary behind the bulk of the work. The seeds have been planted by his work.
Gotcha. And you mentioned this was all done pre-pandemic. The initial visionary work was pre-pandemic, right?
Yeah, the initial planning work that was done with the Go Virginia state funding was in advance of and during the pandemic.
Okay. And then what happened when the pandemic hit? How did it change the trajectory or vision for resilient drug supply when recognizing that a lot of the things that were necessary for patients during the pandemic were not readily available?
The pandemic highlighted the gaps that have been existing for probably 15 or 20 years in our pharmaceutical supply chain, but they brought it to the forefront. Everyone became much more aware of the fact that we got 80% or more of our active pharmaceutical ingredients from outside the United States. And the federal government got very interested in that as a concern. And there was a pretty significant grant that was given to a startup in the Richmond region, which Frank was a co-founder of, or is a co-founder of, called Flow. And that BARDA funding was really to build a stockpile of active pharmaceutical ingredients, of essential medicines that could support the United States resiliency were we ever to have a shortage of drug supplies again. And those active pharmaceutical ingredients are being manufactured here in this region and then being put in a stockpile in order to ensure there is availability to those medicines if we were to ever need them.
And is the BARDA grant that was received by Flow and others a component of what you're trying to do with your Alliance for Building Better Medicine? I mean, how is it related or not related to your program?
Personally, when I think about the investment that BARDA has made in this region, I think it was a tremendous accelerant of the work that could happen here. So they made an investment in Flow and in Civica, and Civica standing up a finished film manufacturing facility for injectables here in this region that wouldn't have existed were that investment not to have been made here. And so that is certainly a piece of the work that is happening in the region. But as the partners are coming together and looking at what problems and challenges they might address together in the future, essential medicines are certainly a part of that, but they're not the whole story about the value and the opportunity that exists for pharmaceutical manufacturing in Virginia.
Got it. So tell me about how that was a basis, but what have you done to build upon that and expand the mission for Alliance for Building Better Medicine?
So the base investments that were made in Flow and Civica and AMPAC and the work that they're doing here created a capability set, in the beginning of a capability set for active, rapid translational work. And what I see as being the next phase of that was really what was applied for in Build Back Better. So the Build Back Better Regional Challenge involved 6 component projects in its phase 2. Those 6 component projects involved building out the water and wastewater capabilities in Petersburg so that Petersburg would have the capacity for additional manufacturing supply, and that more pharmaceutical manufacturing or biopharmaceutical manufacturing could come to that region and grow beyond what currently exists. The next piece of the infrastructure investments was in an innovation center here in the Richmond region for wet lab space and startups to be able to spin out of universities and academic centers here, but also out of the work that's happening in the biopharmaceutical space or the pharmaceutical space specifically. The next piece was a scale-up development center. So if we have research and development happening in the area, and that's happening maybe from innovations and startups that have come out of the universities here, but maybe through partnerships from other locations across the country, maybe as a magnet to the work that Frank and his team have been doing, then we need to take that innovation and move it from bench to medicine cabinets, so to speak. It means that we need to be able to manufacture at a higher scale. So the Scale-Up Development Center is one of the investments that has been made through Build Back Better, and it's in Chesterfield County. So it actually sits between Richmond and Petersburg, and literally is the translational engine of going from that bench work and building up a kilo of material to be able to have active pharmaceutical ingredient that could be used in toxicity testing or other types of areas to further academic research or clinical studies or the translation of medicines into a larger scale facility. In addition, those are three of the infrastructure projects, but then there were also projects that we're looking at. What do we need to have from a workforce development perspective? And these are the ones that get to be, for me, very interesting, because when I was at Bio recently, every single talk that I heard talked about the fact that workforce is a real challenge in the life sciences on a national scale. And when we think about the capability sets that are needed end to end, from somebody who has a high school diploma or a certificate, all the way through someone who is a trained professional and postdoctoral experience in the space, most of the work in pharmaceutical manufacturing, especially in small molecule pharmaceutical manufacturing, has not been active in the United States. And so programs in two areas have been invested in. One is in really the community college space and building up the capabilities for certificate programs, but making sure that those programs reach back into underserved and underrepresented communities in Petersburg and in Richmond to ensure that we're not just building a new industry to support, say, people that look like me, but people who may not have had role models in the chemistry and the biotech space that have been living in some of these regions that have been historically underserved and distressed over the years. So there's two programs. One is in the community college space, and then one is a program between VSU and VCU. VSU is Virginia State University, and it's a historically Black college and university that has a tremendous capability set in the sciences, but doesn't quite have the pharmaceutical manufacturing capabilities that VCU does. So those two institutions have partnered to build programs that allow students to have on-ramps into pretty much every phase of the educational pipeline, all the way through to graduate degrees. And then the last piece that was part of the Build Back Better investment has been in building the future state of the supply chain. So building a map. What do we need to attract to this region or partner with in sort of adjacent areas to build an end-to-end supply chain for pharmaceutical manufacturing? What capabilities do we have in neighboring states that are sufficient? Which ones aren't? And how do we make sure that we build a sustaining model that is representative of best practices and a global footprint, where what we learn from people who do research in building of ecosystems that are very efficient is that the more adjacent supplier base allows for these ecosystems to be adaptive and responsive to change. And so that's the type of ecosystem we'd like to build. And that supply chain project is helping us to map what that future state looks like, and then to start to attract interested groups to the region to determine, that what we're doing here is as cool as we think it is, and hopefully come to join us in this mission.
Well, that's pretty exciting, Joy. I mean, it's very robust with all of the different elements that you have with the 6 different legs to this program. And was there a model in the United States that you were trying to emulate, or is this something that is unique in its own design that potentially can be scalable to other regions around the United States, because that's something EDA likes to do. They like to seed programs, get them working operational, and then see if it can be replicated other places in the country for scalability.
Yeah, it's a great question. To the first question of, was there a model that we looked at and emulated? I think the answer is not exactly. There are different pieces of what we have built here in different parts of the country. But as I mentioned, when it comes to advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing and manufacturing of small molecules in the United States, we really haven't been doing this. So that robust supply chain hasn't existed here. And so many of the elements have been built from scratch, looking at different models across the country and the world to say, where do we see pieces that if we could bring them all together in one place would create more opportunity for growth? I do believe that this is a model that others could look at to either tap into or grow from. And I think the tapping into is important because I do believe that the problem and the challenge that we have to solve as a country in reshoring a certain percentage of manufacturing to the United States. And that's not just pharmaceuticals. It touches pretty much every part of our supply chain, which keeps us functioning as humans. But pharmaceuticals are certainly an important piece of it. I think that we really have to look at where do we have capabilities of excellence? And rather than competing across the country, creating centers of excellence. And in those centers of excellence, grow capabilities that can be shipped out to other regions to support growth in other regions. And I think that idea of growing capabilities in different parts of the country is something I would personally love to see us look at as a model, where if the best person when it comes to solid state formulation of molecules or of tablets and of medicines is in Rutgers University, well, why would we do that work here? We should partner with them and help to build both regions to a point where that excellence and the capability is being shared and then also replicated to other places where it can grow in the country.
I think that would be a great model if we can implement that. But, competition does get involved from communities and different entities. And I guess the key is that this program's funding, I think you stated, was over $60 million in EDA as well as matching monies to get this initiated. So it's a pretty significant and robust program. And I would imagine as part of your proposal, you had to demonstrate sustainability, that it could be maintained after the initial funding was obtained and utilized. So what is your vision for a sustainability plan after the Build Back Better grant goes away?
Yeah, so this is the reason that there are commercial entities that are partners in the project and the process to ensure that groups like Civica that are reshaping and reimagining what the business model is for drug delivery and really partnership with hospital systems, as well as manufacturing insulin here in Petersburg and looking at what the business model is for a low cost insulin manufacturing in Petersburg. Those are the sustainability elements, is really making sure that that initial investment that has been made has commercial legs to it, because unless there's an economically viable model, the sustainability of these activities will be limited. And so I think that what I notice is that what we're creating is a new way of thinking about solving problems. And while I certainly agree that there will be competition between different regions, maybe it's idealistic of me to imagine that we would recognize that the challenges that we have to solve are so huge that without partnering with the individuals who can create that holistic map and the cartography of what needs to be done in order to reshore something like pharmaceuticals, we won't get there. And so my curiosity is the government has a great opportunity here to encourage collaboration, and they certainly have amongst the Build Back Better winners. And we have quite a strong partnership among the life science winners to determine how can we learn from each other? Where are the programs that someone is building in St. Louis really similar to what we're trying to create in Virginia? And how do we learn best practices? And I think while competition is certainly part of what needs to happen, this idea of co-opetition is very interesting to me, where by looking at the whole pie and realizing how massive it is, we'd be able to partner. And then in doing so, some of the sustainability starts to sort itself out, because rather than us both going after the same thing, we're starting to go after complementary pieces of it. And if we're continuing to remain in dialogue around what we're building, we have the capacity to solve these bigger problems that if we're working against each other, we're never going to solve.
Yeah, the co-opetition word is one that a lot of people refer to, but it's hard to put in practice. But I think you're actually showing how it can work. And, one of the questions that a lot of listeners are going to probably have for you, and this is Joy Polefrone, who's the executive director for the Alliance for Building Better Medicine that we're talking to today, is that why Richmond? Because a lot of focus is generally Boston, San Francisco, San Diego, Research Triangle, New York, Maryland, or other areas. But tell me why and how you've demonstrated that Richmond and Petersburg are a good place to do this rather than the traditional major life science hubs.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways to look at the answer to that question. And the first is we need to change the way we do chemistry of small molecules in order to make generic medicine manufacturing economically viable and environmentally friendly in the United States. And the person who is at the forefront of changing the way that we do chemistry is here in Richmond, Virginia. And so while an individual shouldn't shape the development of an entire ecosystem, having a team that's been built around that individual, having educational offerings that allow chemists and chemical engineers to work in collaboration and in partnership in developing new methods that are scalable and translatable, that's a really important asset. And that's an asset that has existed in this region for a number of years and has been proven through the work that Medicines for All has done with the Gates Foundation. And so there's an element there of growing the assets and expanding their impact versus creating them somewhere else. The other piece of it that I think is important is another asset that was here in this region was the manufacturing facility that's now owned by AMPAC that wasn't in use. And so being able to repurpose that for active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturing, using advanced manufacturing capabilities that are new for small molecules is something else that existed here. And then the other piece of it, I think, is the cost of doing business in this region in the country is certainly less expensive than all of the ones that you mentioned. Having lived in Boston and Seattle and not every region that you've mentioned, the cost of living and the cost of doing business in Richmond, Petersburg is certainly far less than all of those regions.
Well, I think one of the things that this does is gives other regions hope that similar things, and if they have vision and leaders, they can actually build things that can actually go to scale, and you don't have to be located in one of these major life science sectors in the United States. And potentially, I think one of the other things is the spin-off benefits this has for beyond your region and the whole state of Virginia probably woke some people up that, hey, we have greater assets than what people have given us credit for. And maybe this coalition coming together has gotten even people within the Virginia legislature and other people involved in industry and academia in Virginia. Hey, maybe there's other things that we can be doing that we haven't done. And this is just the beginning of something that really will be big in the future.
I sure hope so. Because the other thing that I think is really important to mention about Virginia and the geographic asset that it is that Richmond is halfway between Rockville, Maryland and Research Triangle Park. And when you look at a map of the life sciences ecosystem up and down, or the assets rather up and down the eastern seaboard, you see a big gap. And I don't believe that big gap is accurate. And I also don't think that it's something that should remain to be true in the next 3 to 5 years, because I think there's a real missed opportunity in not growing an ecosystem here in this region. And I think not just the region, but across the state, there are tremendous educational assets in Virginia. If you look at what's happening in Roanoke and what's happening in Charlottesville and what's happening in Richmond and also in the Tidewater area, and of course, that's not even to begin to mention all of the tremendous work in Northern Virginia. Life sciences in Virginia has a tremendous amount to offer. And I think to date, we haven't seen ourselves as being capable of, or maybe ambitious in setting a stake in the ground to say that we have the capacity, the knowledge, and the assets to be a true player and leader in the parts of life sciences where we are strong. And I think there's a real opportunity there.
And I think what's funny is the different perspectives different people have in different geographical areas in the same industry, because we're based in Rockville with BioHealth Innovation, and putting the BioHealth capital region together. It really started in Maryland because there was a high concentration of assets in Maryland, and then moved down into DC, and now has expanded into the Virginia area. So we always looked at Gaithersburg as sort of the epicenter for the BioHealth capital region, just because of the concentration of biopharmaceutical companies in that region. You shed a different light on this, saying, hey, maybe it's different rather than just Maryland, DC, and Virginia. But if Richmond is the center of the ecosystem between Research Triangle and Rockville and Maryland, maybe we've been thinking too small. And then it goes further north too, Philadelphia, Delaware, down into the area. It's all sort of the eastern seaboard, and I'd say I-95, or the Amtrak corridor, really is connected, but is differentiated based on the leaders that you have or the drivers within those different regions. So, Joy, it's great to hear a different perspective from some people who look at their region as sort of the epicenter that they're building on, different than what other regions perceive themselves to be.
Yeah. And I think what's so powerful about what you're describing is our ability collectively to perspective shift. And in solving some of these bigger challenges and problems, I guess what I'll say is, if I take a step back and look at what I thought I would experience coming out of the pandemic, was not a tremendous amount of inspiration and appreciation and awe in our life sciences sector. But that's what I did experience. What we were capable of doing as a country when it came to science and innovation was tremendous. And it took us collectively shifting our perspective. And I think there are certain things happening in a global landscape that might allow us to create a perspective shift that came out of the pandemic, just acknowledging that our supply chain is not secure. We don't have the access to resources and tools that we need to sustain life. And so if we look at it through that lens and that perspective, the problem we're solving is so huge that we have a tremendous opportunity to work together on the pieces. And my hope is that it doesn't take another pandemic to shift our perspective, to see that the challenges that we have to solve for are both huge, but also solvable if we're working together. And so if we stitch together that corridor in the way that you're describing and continue to expand capabilities where we need to, and grow on assets or build on assets that are really strong, I do believe that we have the capacity to solve these big problems. But it takes a different perspective and mindset for us to get there.
Well, it takes a whole bunch of alliance leaders that have the same recognition that you have, that want to work together, because unfortunately, we've been reactive rather than proactive. And if you look at what's happening about potential future pandemics, federal government thinks that this pandemic's done and they've moved on. So there isn't a lot of funding sitting there right now to think about how do you prevent future pandemics, because they have other fish to fry right now in this political environment that we're in. So I think initiatives like the Alliance for Building Better Medicine, doing the work on the ground, can keep the proactive visions alive. But unfortunately, we have to make certain that some of our leaders who have the big bucks that can make the difference in the future recognize the impact that they can make if they think about 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and don't get in that reactive mode that we've been in as a country for centuries.
Indeed. And what you're speaking to also is our organization's ability to maintain a steady drumbeat of awareness, which is one of the things that we are working on and will continue to work on. Because I do believe that one of the challenges is that there's a lot of information flying at all of us every day, including our legislators. And so figuring out how to maintain focus on some of the the steady problems and challenges that we need to unpack and solve for as a country is really important. And that's really where our job comes in, to do that work, to maintain that awareness.
That was leading into part of my close, and really it's the future goals and direction and vision for the Alliance for Building Better Medicine in the future. You just talked about one. What are some of the other goals and visions you have for the direction in the future?
Yeah, so I believe that we have a tremendous opportunity to look at where our assets are unique and differentiated and determine how we collaborate effectively with others. And I think that we've been really focused on building the infrastructure and the capabilities that we've had the seeds planted for with Build Back Better. And I think the next phase of that is, how do we operationalize those to grow them? And I don't necessarily mean grow their revenue or their assets, but make sure that those investments have impact. And so if this Scale Up Development Center gets stood up and there are opportunities to collaborate with people from all over the country or all over the world, and being able to accelerate the advancement of small molecule manufacturing, then that's how we should be thinking, so that we're bringing capabilities to the region that help the region grow, but our impact is national and potentially international in some of the work that we might do. And so for me, it's about operational execution, as well as maintaining a perspective and a conversation around the importance and the urgency of solving these problems, and the tension between those two things of making sure we continue to invest in our region and we grow the capabilities so that they are operationally excellent, and that we don't lose sight of the very big problem that we're trying to solve, and how important it is that we work together as a coalition and a region, but also as a region of the mid-Atlantic and of the country, to solve this much bigger problem that isn't going away on its own.
Well, I congratulate you, and you're very eloquent on explaining what the mission is for the Alliance for Building Better Medicine. Hopefully, this podcast will give greater visibility to those who are listening. And if people want to get in touch with you or are interested in joining or becoming a part of the Alliance, how would they do that, Joy?
Well, thank you so much, Rich. This has been such a tremendous opportunity to talk about the work that we're doing, and to be connected to your community is really important to us, and the work that we're trying to achieve together. If somebody wanted to learn more about the Alliance, you can go to our website, which is buildingbettermedicine.com. And you can send me an email. My email address is joy@buildingbettermedicine.com. And I hope to hear from you. And I would love to learn how we might work together to solve these bigger problems.
And I'll close by saying, is there anything that I didn't ask you or you wanted to communicate to the listeners before we close this podcast?
I think the only thing I'd like to add is the power of partnership. I mean, even this conversation and us learning together about the work that you all have done in the initiatives and standing up other organizations over the years, the different opportunities that we have to work together with others who are solving similar problems, but also others who have different capabilities than us. And so just really how important it is that organizations like yours and ours collaborate together, as well as identify ways to support each other.
We're in Joy. So I want to thank Joy Polefrone, who's the Executive Director, Alliance for Building Better Medicine, for being on BioTalk. And we'll probably do a follow-up to see how you're doing it on your milestones and goal achievement in the future, Joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.